Hey guys, I'm John Mosho,
I'm Jen, and you're listening to Nick Nat Goes to the Movies.
the one-stop shop podcast for all things movie, TV, and pop culture.
Turns out he's a major cinephile. They don't watch enough movies. It's a very simple formula. And here we go. Well, we are back, and much sooner than our last pause. The goal with spring movies coming in bulk is to get back to the roots that kept these episodes coming back in, a bulk. Less sporadic and more to the bi-weekly format that has served Nick Nat Goes to the Movies, the podcast that you love to hear. It served us pretty well. And today we are cooking up some scares and, like I said, coming back a lot sooner than expected. Not unlike the movie I'm super excited to talk about. This is, of course, Scream 6. While I've yet to make a full Scream episode, I'd looked back and I checked, and crazy I haven't done it yet. But that has to happen in the near future. But I did talk about the fifth one that came out back in the start of 2022. With this franchise, there have been bigger pauses between, 2 and 3, 3 and 4, 4 and 5, some being over a decade. But this franchise that came out back in 1996, I still have my OG ghost face mask from my some Halloween costume. I don't know how old I was back then. But this franchise is back with a vengeance. Very little gap time between 5 and 6. And in my opinion, this is a franchise that has never really had a bad entry. Some are better than others, but I don't really think there's a bad one. Saying a lot of horror franchises cannot boast with their countless entries. And you guys know I've done at least a good amount of entire horror franchises on this podcast. Somehow not Scream, but I've done a bunch. So, with the big success of the fifth and early commercial success of the sixth one, it feels like this franchise is back from the 90s to the modern ages with this new take on the series from directors Matt Bettinelli, Opplin, and Tyler Gillett, replacing the late legend Wes Craven. But as you know from my takes, commercial success and critic reviews don't always mean the same thing. I know award show movie season is not really my thing. Still not super thrilled with Angela Bassett not getting an Oscar for Black Panther 2 because she really knocked out of the park, but we're not going to go down that rabbit hole at all. Instead, we're going to talk about this movie. And that's kind of what I'm here to help you with, to see, the critic review, the commercial success, all that stuff, but I want you to kind of learn a little bit about this if it's going to be right for you. So spoiler warnings aplenty for this fresh to the theater movie. This is your heads up to make sure you watch that movie before you listen to this episode, and proceed with caution, because you can always be right back, or will ya? Those are the rules after all. But for now, sit back or hop on that elliptical and let's talk about if Scream 6 really is worth the praise, and more importantly, the continued investment from this fan base that you and I are both a part of. We're all Ghostface fans after all, and what do they say, right? The fan base can't be toxic or whatever, right? I don't remember what the exact line was in Scream 5, but something like that from Jack Quaid's character. But let's see who's actually in this movie, because as you may know from that fifth one, Jack Quaid is famously dead in the fifth movie of these. So, when the last one came around, that was my first time seeing a Scream movie in theaters. The franchise got me hooked, much later than the first four came out, with, the scares, the pop culture, and, it was kind of fun seeing the big name actors who are all over this place. Still can't believe they got, small roles for Liev Schreiber, who I love in that first X-Men. It's not a good movie, X-Men Origins Wolverine, but I think he's great, and it's crazy that they couldn't find a way to get him back for Logan in some way. Patrick Warburton, look, we all know Kronk and everything, but is his fame even more now with current Bachelor TV show person Zach Shawcross? That's his uncle. He's in other things too, but Bachelorette coming up and Bachelor final right around the corner. So, just be ready for that. We can't make a Bachelor podcast. I think that would be too much out of brand. But with our fantasy league, look, season 1 killed it with my girl Susie. Season 2, second place with what the heck, Erich. And then this season, my girl Charity. With our point totals, I got at the moment I'm in 5th. You never know what could change, but dang. Thought I had a winner, and the cry points did not help my points. If you guys are ever bored and want to hear all about the glory of our scoring system, let me know. I'd be happy to talk that, though. But getting distracted, and that's reality TV. Let's talk about something a little more important: fictitious serial killer murder shows. So, and movies. People forget about the MTV VH1 shows. Those are pretty good too. We'll also do an episode on that, I promise, because those are a lot better than I think people realized. So, but to the movies though, of course, Emma Roberts from the 4th one, both Scream Queens and American Horror Story legend. The list goes on and on. This is a bit of a tirade, but I have to speak on the history of my relationship with these movies. The Scream franchise was the toe dip for me into the entire horror genre. Without it, I would never have gotten into Halloween, Friday the 13th, The Purge, and any other zombie or vampire movies. Walking Dead helped too, but Scream was really got me into it. And look, that includes, when I think of vampire movies, talk a little zombie, the best nonfiction horror masterpiece with historical bases out there, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. And while all of those movies and franchises I mentioned are amazing, especially that documentary about one of our presidents hunting vampires, Scream will always have a chokehold on me, with all the pop culture and genre references, along with some good scares and some fatalities. For all the true crime girlies, just think of this as my personal healthy obsession. There are way worse things out there to be addicted to or to have a weakness for. My resume weakness is just sweet treats. Super hard when you live in Wisconsin and have the all-encompassing pressure of having the best bakery around in Uncle Mike's. They're doing their Sweet 16 bakery version of March Madness right now. Pretty fun if you're in Wisconsin looking for another fun bracket thing to do, because Lord knows my bracket, at least on the men's side, it's bad. Ride in Texas and hoping for the best for that. And on the women's, let's go South Carolina. I got a better shot at my women's bracket, that's for sure. But to Uncle Mike's, and my weakness for sweet treats, those Kringles are so addictive. That's truly one of the scariest things out there as far as I'm concerned. That and the fear of being forever alone. That and spiders as big as houses, but anywho, this episode is not about those things, because we have gone all over the place and we are just kicking off. And it's not about my hypothesis about the shared but somehow different sides of the same coin with the fandom between true crime and the horror slasher genre. What I do want to get into is who is in this movie, so we can talk about this movie and get back to, kind of got a little off the rails here. But more importantly than who's in it is, to another degree, who isn't. So, the new core four, as they're called, are all back from the 2021 soft boot requel with In the Heights star Melissa Barrera, the internet fandom metastar Jenna Ortega. And as surprising as it may have been after their characters survived the last movie, both Jasmine Savoy Brown and Mason Gooding are back to provide some separation from the family story and also add some levity and live genre analysis to subtly break the fourth wall, a Scream franchise staple. Obviously, we will not be seeing any David Arquette after the last one, but Courtney Cox is back as one of those legacy characters. But more exciting is a long-standing rumored to be alive and briefly teased in the last one, Hayden Panettiere is back. From A Bug's Life to Remember the Titans to Kingdom Hearts to Heroes to this franchise. She's back from Scream 4, and a fun welcome change. We've seen a lot of the characters die here, and quite a few survive brutal attacks. The original 3 made a habit of this, but this was a first for the franchise of kind of bringing someone back that you kind of thought was dead from a previous movie. Of course, the big omission is in the face of the franchise with Neve Campbell. The rumors around have been a pay dispute, and while we did not see her in this one, they at least addressed it a bit here. The hope is we can see her as well as the recently teased director, I don't remember who said it, but the return of potentially Patrick Dempsey, who we have not seen since Scream 3, and his detective character, Kincaid, had been married to Neve Campbell's character, Sydney, since at least the 5th one, maybe in the 4th one. I guess he was supposed to be in that one, but was busy with the Grey's Anatomy, and much sadder, a one-movie Transformers role. But with these directors taking time to respect things and those from the past, bringing back Heather Matarazzo in the 5th movie from the 3rd one, my hope is to see both of these actors back in seeing kind of some of their married roles in the eventual 7th one. That, and we're still waiting to see if Matthew Lillard has survived the 1st one, getting a TV dropped on his head. Yes, like a lot of you thought this was the new Ghostface from the 6th movie. Sadly not to be, even with that focus on the past and the history and the legacy. Sadly not to be. But they wanted to make him the villain of the 3rd one. Kind of a premise of the very underrated and good Fox show with Kevin Bacon, James Purfoy, and Sean Ashmore in the following. That all changed after the Columbine High School shooting. But his character was planned to be alive, and this movie even teases us with some info about it as well of, could he have survived the TV getting crashed on his head? Could he not? They bring up the maybe, but they also later kill a character with the TV, so your guess is as good as mine if that ever will come to be. A lot, I would say, less likely that to happen than to see Sydney and Detective Kincaid back in their role in some way, because we missed her in the 6th one and we haven't seen him in forever. We think that should happen, I would think, at least outside of some wish fulfillment. Who is actually in this, who's kind of on the newer side of things? Well, a ton of people, but let me focus on a few. I feel like the newer actors I was most excited for were just not in this for very long. You assumed the new Spider-Man franchise actor Tony Revolori and burgeoning Scream queen in her own right from Ready or Not, Samara Weaving, they were either going to be in this a lot and be the killers, or be in this not a lot and get killed off early. There was a bit of a mix of these, which we'll get into, but yeah, neither one of them really had much screen time. Henry Czerny has been in a few fun spooky things, including the aforementioned Ready or Not. But my first big foray with him was this, I feel like it was big at the time, but I don't think anyone really thinks of it anymore, especially because it kind of helped catapult Emily Van Camp to the MCU stuff. But it was Revenge on ABC. His character there was flawed, villainous, and just the right amount of cocky. And I was excited to see who he would be, and he too was in and out of this movie quickly enough. The same thing happened when I got super into and did a podcast of the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, and was introduced to another actor with similar vibes as the actor and then the role he was playing, Richard Coyle, who was Lord Faustus Blackwood, I believe. And I was excited to see where that villainous patriarch would be able to play in the Harry Potter prequel series Fantastic Beasts, but his role was small and not the villain there at all, instead being a young Aberforth. Expectations are like assumptions. They make asses out of you, me, and everyone in between. So, Scream 6. This movie will, of course, draw comparisons to at least, if not other movies like it, but for sure Friday the 13th Part 8. Jason Takes Manhattan. I know people may not remember it, but if you know, you know. Not often have horror, or even more specifically slasher movies, taken themselves out of their little towns or regions. Elm Street, Camp Crystal Lake, Haddonfield, Illinois, along with Woodsboro, are all iconic and mostly the base camps for their own franchises. But in 1989, for their 8th entry, Friday the 13th wanted to shake things up a little bit. Honestly, looking back and looking at the title, right, Jason Takes Manhattan, seems fun. Heck, go watch the first trailer for this. It is like a minute long, so you're not wasting a lot of time. And it does spend a lot of time of seeing Jason Voorhees from the back, looking at New York City, all the lights up at night. And there's a piano version of New York, New York, Frank Sinatra's song. Follow that up with quick shots of people terrified of Jason. And this sounded like a home run. I mean, that's a franchise that really, ever since the Tommy Jervis stuff, hasn't had like a character that you had to be fixated on to see. As much as we would have loved that. I would have loved that. I know I would have loved that because that's why the sixth one is the best one. But with that not being kind of, you weren't beholden to that, you could have him run around town, this big city in New York City, and that be a whole crazy thing, like a monster movie, but on a smaller scale. It would be curious, It was a curious premise. And, like, it just sounded and looked like it would be good. However, if you've seen that movie, heard my podcast on that entire franchise, or can just assume with like the tone that I'm using, there's like a big but coming. The final product there was not what was promised in that title or in that trailer. Instead of a citywide slasher fest, Jason spent most of this time hunting on a prom boat leaving from Crystal Lake. And only at the end did this story setup have like a brief pit stop in the Big Apple, and kind of we saw a little bit of what was promised in the trailer. And honestly, it was kind of forgettable. I'd say sadly it was mostly forgettable. They even had a subway scene where nothing happens. They were in a diner where nothing really happens. The only real memorable scene from this NYC trip that I can think of, and it's brief, is he's chasing some people, he punts a boombox, some like biker guys almost get in a fight with him, but instead of that, he just lifts his mask up and they kind of run away. The boxing scene was fun too, but really that had very little to do with using the city as a lived-in and unique setting from every other camp thing that we'd kind of seen that franchise in before. This was what I had hoped and wanted for Scream 6, and years later, 34 to be exact, look at this trailer of Scream 6, look at the first one, and you can tell that there was going to be some genuine use of a big city and make it less of set dressing and make it kind of important to the setup of things happening. Now, at the moment, the Friday the 13th movies are pretty formulaic. Have been since the last entry in 2009. We'll see if the Crystal Lake prequel on Peacock could change that. There's always a hope. Now, you could say the same thing about Scream and the franchise with 6 entries now, 3 seasons of a show, 2 related, 1 not. But somehow things always feel a little different. I think that it's part of their willingness to not forget the main characters and their history. And look, Halloween has this kind of staple character, of course, with Laurie Strode and Jamie Lee Curtis, but they haven't made it a continual story. It's just a lot of different reboots. I've just recently rewatched the Busta Rhymes one where she's in it for like 10 minutes, if that. It's not the same. Some lovely entries in Halloween, but it's not a continual story that keeps going with the same cast kind of thing. Like, even after 2 movie entries, starting to build off a new group of final girls and even one final guy, like newer for the genre, but not this franchise. Like, there's history and remembrance for things that have come in the earlier entries, be they previous killers, be they musical hints, just things that kind of give reverence to what's come before. And even when things feel similar, of people dissecting horror movies and not realizing they're in them, this genre has found a sweet spot of playing with the tropes of the genre. They also come up with creative ways to subvert them without it insulting their audience, who, yes, do enjoy the general concept of the horror genre. It's like the inverse of what the Scooby-Doo Velma thing was. It felt the need to make you feel like idiots for liking the concept of Scooby-Doo. What a weird thing. How is that getting a season 2? I guess we'll never know. I've always loved, though, the balance of dark humor, gore, and good storytelling that build on the collective trauma of our survivors without killing the entire cast of, underdeveloped teams doing a full-scale swap every time. like what used to be the default in the horror genre in movies and franchises. So, this franchise has a history. After the surprise of the first one, it must have been crazy watching it like live. And they've killed off some big names, especially early on. Drew Barrymore, Jada Pinkett Smith, Liev Schreiber, Lucy Hale, Anna Paquin, Sarah Michelle Gellar, and more. The fifth one played with this a bit by having a character be attacked, survive, and actually be a part of the movie, where normally if you see someone at the beginning, they're not making it very far. So this movie, I had some hopes when we first saw Weaving's Laura Crane, and we heard Tony Revolori's Jason Carvey. Now, while neither mattered in the grand scheme of things, it was kind of crazy to see not only these movies impact on film student serial killers in training who are fans of the in-universe movie series Stab. Normally it is a one-off of someone killing a distant friend group related to the eventual final people. But this guy casually kills someone in New York City, and before he gets got by the actual main villain, or one of them, it's crazy to see him even have a regular guy brief interaction with one of the leads from the last movie, Jenna Ortega's Tara Carpenter. It's cool to see the beginning be more attached to the rest of the movie instead of a cold open, and to show the relationship between, murder-happy film student fans and this in-universe franchise. Ghostface, the real one in this movie, actually saving the Carpenter sisters, Tara and Sam, the later played by Melissa Barrera, but more so just to save them for him or her, or spoiler alert, their nefarious plans. The new kids along for the ride are fine in their own right, but never do a ton for us, but you gotta love more time. You can see why they kept them both, for Jasmine Savoy Brown and Mason Gooding as Mindy and Chad Meeks Martin. Chad is more of his own fun challenge to the jock archetype role, but Mindy is a lovely related to and plot-based replacement for Randy from Scream 1 and 2, and people forget a little bit in 3. There's something interesting about the entire internet taking the world by storm and making people think that Sam is the real killer, kind of playing with an idea that never really was seen as fleshed out with the fourth one and Emma Roberts. I know they wanted to maybe start that as something, and things changed, only made one entry, and it was fine entry. We just never really could have seen what could have happened with Emma Roberts and this idea that they had for the fourth one. We're seeing it a little bit here, but we never saw it with her. But hey, she went on to be in some lovely horror TV franchises. But it kind of builds on this idea that was in the last one of, Sam's related to a killer from Scream 1. And it's actually a bit of a problem, and it kind of leads into the potential setup of the true villain of these modern day killings, and kind of giving them, there's always going to be this scapegoat if she's always going to be related to this serial killer from the past in Billy Loomis. Now, that would be a fun twist, right? If they were to make one of these people, these good people, as like actually kind of lose it and become one of the killers. They tried it, I think, in maybe Friday the 13th Part 5. They had this soft tease of maybe that guy Tommy Jervis could replace Jason. Obviously, it never really worked, and sure didn't work in the last Halloween with Corey. Corey was not a good substitute for Michael Myers. That is for sure. Corey didn't do it. I watched, I think, like a third of that last night before I fell asleep. But here it would be interesting. I don't know what it would look, but I'd be curious to see if they made either Courtney Cox as Gail Weathers the killer, either the Carpenter sisters. I feel like those things wouldn't necessarily happen, maybe not for a while, but it's an interesting theory. But pretty soon, more Ghostface killings, bring in a new police person, Gail Weathers, not Sydney this time as much as they wanted to, and a fun back after a short tease for Hayden Panettiere's Kirby Reed from the fourth movie. I think it was like an internet video JPEG we saw in the fifth one of something, but there had always been rumors of she was still moving the last time we saw her. There always was this thought that they were going to bring her back. It's just crazy that after so many years, they brought her back, and they brought her back in a pretty substantial role. Like every good horror movie, or every good one, for me at least, there is grief and trauma exploration and coming to terms with things. I feel like when people watch Friends, it's for relatable, whatever. I don't know. I never really got it. But I feel like you see people overcome their griefs and traumas and these hyper-evolved horror situations. It makes you think, oh, maybe I can deal with my everyday run-of-the-mill crap as well. So, sorry, sitcoms will never be my thing. And, I get it, but I really don't get it. I get why people watch them. I just could never get into that. It's like Hallmark movies. Sorry, Mom. But also, I think this movie specifically takes this idea of this and kind of shows two different ways of processing things that you've gone for. One is trying to forget everything that happened, move on with your life, and one is trying to deal with it, even with the whole lack of a therapist willing to help, because that does help. Gosh, I wish we saw more from that kind of therapy angle from Henry Czerny than the Dead You Miss It therapist role we got. I think, actually, another little tangent, all the movies they were going to do, extended cuts and everything, and there was this talk of the third Batman movie, the one with Tommy Lee Jones and Jim Carrey, and there was this whole other side angle that kind of had a therapy hit to it. I really don't remember the names of all the characters in that one, but there is kind of like this, I think, character that kind of brings up ideas of him dealing with this stuff. And to Val Kilmer's credit, I kind of liked his movie as well. They made it a little goofier, obviously, in the first two, but it would have been curious to see that angle of the therapy side of Batman. Would have been a thing that we've just never seen, and it would be kind of cool to see it. No pow, kazam, bam, but, would be interesting. Normally we see things like that in horror movies, not superhero movies. So, in this movie, and even I'd say the last two, but I definitely thought about this one, right? You're going to go to horror movies, you want to see some good kills, and that sounds morbid, but that's the genre. Like, they have some just creative and messed up ones here, and it really has. These last two movies have kind of upped the stakes on just being a little more aggressive and visceral. Not in a way that's, like, gross, like a Saw movie. I don't know. Those are something else entirely, but, like, they're just good kills in this movie. I don't know how to really describe it more than it's just good, It's also just a unique angle, I think, to double down on really trying to frame Sam and use history with all these older masks to make things relate to the history. Her history with her dad, who is back again as Billy Loomis, still played by Skeet Ulrich, which it always looks a little different. That obviously they kind of have him at the age, but he's not the age he was when he died, when she would have seen photos of him. But I feel like I'm pretty good at suspending my disbelief for that kind of thing they've been going with Skeet Ulrich for the last two movies. But the big thing I love about this movie, and the big thing I want to talk about in regard to all of the Jason Takes Manhattan stuff, is that even early on this movie, there's a out and in the open Ghostface attack taking place at a bodega. I wonder if with Melissa Barrera and In the Heights, it's just fun little coincidence, right? What a musical. Big fan. In the Heights. Big fan. But the fact that it's not, at night, it's not isolated, it's out there, there's witnesses to this attack, and the guy shotguns someone. These scenes make things scary and out of pocket with it all going down in a super populated series. This is the second most wild and out of these here. Look, we knew Kirby's character was going to be back, but to be an FBI agent, I was a little shocked that was how they got her into things and pretty quickly into the fold. The why makes sense, especially when they ask her, is to, you had these bad guys in your life and now you want to put it all to bed. We have heard this rationale in this genre and cop and government movies as well. I mean, the whole Clarice show and, the franchise, I suppose, kind of plays that same idea of after the first Silence of the Lamb, Clarice wants to deal with the bad people of the world after seeing the horror. So the rationale is great. It just is a surprise that that's where they put Kirby to bring her into things. I mean, it's probably why it works well enough to make us all suspicious about it. And, like, if that's the true reason she's there or not, especially with the series of killing, focusing on some of these legacy people and getting rid of them. And let's not forget, she too is a spooky movie fanatic, which does lead her to be a big suspect. I mean, shoot, pretty much everyone in these movies who's been a killer outside of the mom in the second one, Billy Loomis's mom, like, that's it. That's the only person of these killers from Scream 1 to Scream 5 who was not, like, a fan of the genre of movies as far as we know. They never got into that with her. They just would seem like a revenge thing. While we do not see Sydney, hearing Gail write a book again and get on the bad side of the two sisters feels a bit of a step down from her character arc, especially with where the fifth one ended. And these are the same directors, so like they did it intentionally. It just didn't really... I was a little surprised, but I did enjoy the scene of her dodging the first punch thrown and getting hit by the second one with, you know, two Carpenter sisters instead of just the one of Sydney. It was a little cute nod to the first two movies with Sydney almost always throwing a big hit at Gale early on. The Ghostface Shrine was as amazing as we expected. It was harrowing. It was great. Probably the coolest thing from the whole trailer, especially with the real life thought of, you know, imagine if this was happening and people taking their collective true crime fandom to perhaps an unhealthy level. Food for thought. But this movie has to make you think that it's the meta of the whole thing. But before going there, while we never got a lot of time with Arrow and She-Hulk actor Josh Segarra, his introduction to a potential problem, always suspect the romantic leads, right? Well, we for sure love to see the big scene in this, and I thought it was one of the cooler, tense-laden scenes, was they had this ladder across apartments trying to get from one to the other, and, you know, the one apartment, everyone's being attacked by a ghost face, like, as killings are happening and trying to get people out, like the last one where one of our new members to the group, and she already got stabbed, but like the ladder's getting rattled as like they are like just reaching for her. They almost, I think even their hands touch right before she gets shaken off the ladder and killed. So much drama. And look, they made you think, right? There's a chance she'll make it out because you never truly know who's going to make it and who's not. You have an idea, but you never really know. And the setup for that kind of set piece moment was very good. Also, attention to detail is always great in these. Like when you had Sydney still had the Greek letters in the third one from the guy in the second one. And here, I remember seeing like a brief clip of Jenna Ortega with like a scar in her hand. And I was like, oh shoot, that's when in the beginning of the fifth one, she got stabbed right through her hand. Like Kirby had the scar. Like we always just like to see a little attention to detail. And, you know, one... you know, on your abdomen or leg, like somewhere you can cover it, like you don't have to really worry about it in a makeup standpoint, but your hand, that one kind of has to be there for a lot of stuff just in case, right? These movies are not always going to be action based, but man, that ladder stuff was crazy. It really didn't give you a chance to breathe, and this movie doesn't like a lot. It even in the parts where someone's not being attacked, there's just this somewhat uneasy tension always kind of there of who's the killer, because it's like a Knives Out, right? It's like a mystery. Like, I will say, I just really like this movie. There it is. That's the point I want to make. That's the end of the episode. But seriously, the one thing that a lot of these movies normally do well is the meta explanation breakdown scene. One of these movies said it, I think it's 5, but this franchise is a, you know, pop culture genre explosion whodunit to its core. And the explanation scene is normally a staple of these. The first Scream and Randy breaking it down at the party. His video breakdown from Beyond the Grave of the third one. The fourth one worked with the movie club doing it. And even the fifth one with the requel reveal, you know, like Dewey was taking notes. He's always taking notes on the rules. One of the many endearing things about him is not a genre fan, of course. And the accusation of it potentially being our final girl as like one and the same could be the killer. In this one, that scene never really had the same magic as the other ones. No fault to, the character, Mindy's character, but because she still has some fun moments in this movie overall outside of the scene with the meta, her need to predict the right killer after getting it wrong last time and constantly referring to one of the new random kids as like, oh, he must be the Ghostface. I mean, she's right, but when she doesn't get it fully right, this thing that kind of feels like it's her own character. But we could see Randy kind of from the original 3 movies doing something as well, and it's just like her first like, oh man, I didn't get it right again. Like with the last movie killing off, speaking of Dewey, fan favorite character, and no Sydney, you kind of thought there's a chance this movie would kill off Gail. You saw things in trailers, you saw her in the layer of Ghostface history, but you also saw her being attacked in an apartment. I for sure assumed they were killing off Gail. You just didn't really know when. This could lead to, build up stakes for the franchise, and it would kind of tie into the overall franchise in the new era. And I guess the Star Wars did at some point, right? They kind of killed off their legacy characters in the last 3 movies. And I thought that scene with Gail was great. Seeing her grow from, despised journalist to the parental guiding role for the Carpenter sisters. Shout out for using Dewey's musical theme, the most upbeat music in this franchise. The growth was there, and it was cool to see her kind of taking that role that, we kind of saw her passing, the torch on from taking it from Dewey, and see how she was processing that. I would think we could have used more of that angle. Maybe that's why they couldn't kill her off, is because they only kind of touched on it. We didn't see as much of that as I think we could have and wanted to, and maybe we'll see a little more, because I feel like they can't just kind of brush that under the rug. But shocked that they kept her alive. And her scene, she kind of had the upper hand for a while, and they always make some goofy mistake that leads to that not happening. I for sure thought she was dead, but in the end, everyone kept being alive again, and she was one of them. And there was something to be said about, I think, the setup for her getting targeted was the van scene being a fake out to a death from the previous Scream 2, and having Randy die in the van, the second one, and then having his relatives, Chad and Mindy, in the van saying, oh, this is, a van, this is where our uncle died. It was kind of a fun way to throw suspicion off a few characters, one of them being, this new cop character who kind of helped with the setup. Can't say I know a lot about Dermot Mulroney as Detective Bailey, but I liked his balance of fun and impassioned cop/parent. This kind of played us a bit, assuming we could replace one cop character with another. They kind of did this in easily the best of 3 Halloween remakes, the 2018 one from the new trilogy, remake, reboot, whatever you want to call it. But Haluk Bilginer as Dr. Sartain taking on the new role of, the new Dr. Loomis. They kind of said, they even say, oh, you're the new this. Clearly, he was not the same character. And they made us believe that there, and I think they tried making us believe that here too. Especially, Dewey lost his sister, and this guy lost his daughter. Like, you kind of figured, okay, there are some similar stakes. He kind of seems fun enough, not to the Dewey level, but no one can be, right? The question, of course, ended up by the end is there were so many characters who were dead, who could be left to be one of the ghost faces beside the obvious one? And I have to say, the weakest thing in this movie had to be some of the ghost faces, like, not when they were in the role of, like, behind the mask, but kind of the reveal characters where the college kids, it just never really did it for me, I think. I think that's probably one of the weaker parts of the movie, but we'll get there. Before the big reveal comes one of the best scenes that really utilize the city. The beginning, the bodega, all these were great, but the subway scene was so good with, like, how Jason Takes Manhattan could only dream of having that. Their subway scene was he walked in through and that was it. Like, people were just asleep, no one cared. And you could say that's a New York-ish thing, but, like, not to this level. Like, it was, Halloween was kind of, this whole movie takes place during Halloween. Even the early scenes is kind of like the Halloween weekend, right? And this is, I think, like one of the later Halloween days in the weekend, if not actual Halloween. And like everyone's dressed up on this subway when they're trying to go to the final confrontation back at the Ghostface lair. And there's so many pop culture killer costumes. There's Hellraiser. You know, we see all these characters that, you know, genre people would love to see. And it's super fun and cool. And part of that is also we see some Ghostface, and that's in-universe pop culture from the Stab series. There was just so much tension and drama being on that train, and like wondering if one of these people is the killer. They could have done the following, and they could have all been killers, right? That's always the question. And not even just on the train, but even getting to the train was tough because they got split up, and you know, it's just the quick in and out of the subway. Even then, having, you know, one of the Meeks relatives be seemingly fatally killed, you know, on the train, at least stabbed. I think we kind of thought she was going to be okay, but the other one getting aggressively stabbed at the Scream Museum a lot of times by a lot of people, I'm kind of surprised that none of them died. I really thought Chad could have been dead and it wouldn't have necessarily, we wouldn't have lost it. Like, I like his character, I like the role, but I think you could have said, okay, he had that moment with Jenna Ortega's character, and you kind of said, okay, they had their little romantic thing, and then he could have got. Like, that, it wouldn't have surprised me. Like, I'm happy, right? I'm happy all these characters are back, but I'm also annoyed they didn't kill anyone off. It's kind of a bittersweet mix of emotions that it's almost a little unbelievable that no one of true substance of the main good characters died. Just surprising. I think I would have been annoyed about the killer being Kirby. To bring her back for just that would have been wild. But we got real close, and they made us think that's the direction they were going. They let us on good, and they made her very suspicious at times. Even though I feel like early on I knew the cop having a dead son and bringing up, I felt like I kind of kept thinking Richie. I thought for a bit maybe it could have been Stu Macher because we actually never met his dad. We met Billy's dad. We never actually met Stu's any parents, actually. You know, we saw one of his offspring relatives die in the fifth one in the beginning, but that was sort of it. We kind of heard he had a sister. Sadly, no Matthew Lillard, Stu Macher return yet. But even with, you know, Richie being dead in the last movie, there was something fun about the return of Jack Quaid, the boys, the first Hunger Game legend, here in the role of a flashback Richie. Not like a true flashback, but more of like, honestly, it was kind of fun seeing, you know, someone, you know, in the film nerd kind of world, as a lot of us are, me included. I have my Letterboxd account and everything. And like this guy, you know, film kid, loves these stab movies, and they had like, you know, older, you know, found footage type stuff of him wanting to make these movies and, you know, do his own stab movies, which is obviously kind of his motivations. It's kind of fun seeing the fleshed out motivations of one character 2 movies in. And look, like any film kid, I remember I made movies for some high school classes. I have 2 entries of the Macarena Master with famed villain Dr. Tonghand. But those are for another time to probably never discuss, let's be real. But this movie did have a fake out of killing someone off for the fakery of it, just to give someone a little more room so they can go kill around and run amok without needing an alibi. You gotta, and I always think of And Then There Were None with this idea. Lovely book, great miniseries with like every British actor ever, including like Bern Gorman and Charles Dance. What a miniseries. Now, the family of avenging killers is good motivation and a fun wrinkle to the formula. You know, we had a lot of pair of killers, you know, most of the time it was kid and kid, you know, friends. You never knew if they were going to be a problem or not, if one was going to betray the other, but, you know, kind of the general gist. The third one was his own guy. Somehow they made it work, and he made it work. Killed a lot of people as just one guy. And then in the second one, of course, it was a guy and a mom hellbent on revenge. So the family angle was fun, and it ties into the last one. It's always nice to have these kind of connective tissues. But outside of Detective Bailey, the reveal of him I liked, and I liked him after. But the other killers, his other two kids, surprise, surprise, were just not as interesting as what I would have hoped for. The fighting and kills in this kind of big confrontation were all great. And the ties to Richie, who really was probably the last great villain in this franchise. I know it was not long ago, but you think of 5 and 6. 5 probably feels a little better. I guess I just expected more from their personalities, and we never really got that. And I do really wish Josh Segarra's character, Danny Brackett, had more to do in this last third of the movie. Either be a villain to mirror Scream 2 with Sydney's boyfriend, or have him be more suspicious in the endgame trap like Kirby and really have people wonder, there's all these X factors, who could be the killer? And sadly, we just never really got a ton of his angle. And I really do like him in Arrow. I think he's one of the better Arrow villains, but maybe even Arrowverse in all honesty. No Wentworth Miller and Dominic Purcell, but up there for sure. And of course, John Barrowman, Torchwood legend. Like, there's some good villains in Arrow. There's just not as many as you would think or want, I suppose. So, this movie, though, it does have, grief and trauma, overcoming, exploration between the two sisters, Kirby surprisingly, and somehow less Gale than I would have wanted or expected. I have some wants for the sequel, Neve Campbell, Matthew Lillard, and the hopeful Patrick Dempsey. Or, just confirm that Matthew Lillard's dead. It's so hard with the teases from the 5th and 6th to his house, to the TV. It's so hard to think Matthew Lillard's not alive. Look, I really liked this movie. It'd been a little bit since I'd gone to the theater and seen a movie that I really liked, and I really liked this one. The real question is where the future of this franchise will be. I assume a trilogy. There was kind of a plan with Scream 4 to do a little more than one movie. That never happened. And with all of that, I have a lot more I could say, but I'd said a lot already of talking of this one movie, and I think it's time for that letterbox segment of this episode, for that rating. When I watched this at first, I was hooked. I was really happy with the action, suspense, scares, and gore. I was really happy with the utilization of the New York City setting and how it was all came to be. Immediate reaction for Scream 6 was a 4.5 out of 5 letterbox stars, and how fun was it that this movie, all about the meta of the genre and the movie people overall, a lot of times those people end up as the killers of this franchise. They brought up letterbox stuff. Very fun. But it ended up bumping it down to 4 or 5 stars. Still very good. I think 4 or 5 is my highest I can rate a movie. I don't think anything's perfect. I haven't seen a perfect movie yet, as far as I'm concerned. I like the villain reveal, mix up of it being a family of killers and relating to Richie's villain death in the last one. It draws some similarities to the original second one, takes place at a college, but it's still its own thing. 3 killers are a new scary thing with so many villains this time around. And while we kind of knew there would be some relation to a previous guy in the franchise, when we saw this detective, we kind of knew his son had to either be a previous killer or victim. But, the number of killers was cool. Just the killers were not as memorable as I would have liked as people before, the Ghostface reveal. But obviously one of the best things has to be the actual Ghostface persona, the older worn mask, the more brutal Ghostface nature of all of these things. It was all great for the darker turn that this and the last movie have both been mixing things up with the franchise. But I was, assumptions make us both suckers, was really assuming or hoping Matthew Lillard would be back. There was a chance for the future, but not obviously in this movie because it already has come to pass. And I still am surprised that so many people made it out alive of this movie. No way they were killing Kirby unless she was a villain, but I really expected Gale or one of the core 4. I really probably thought Chad, especially with how many stabs he took. I thought someone was going to end up dead here. Good movie. A lot of scares and gore and pop culture, the true staples of a Scream movie. And even more importantly, good franchise callbacks. I really liked this movie. but it was just a hair behind with Scream 1 and Scream 5. Just a few little things that I couldn't give it that 4.5 out of 5 Letterboxd stars. Like I said, I don't think I've seen a 5 yet. Not even the magical Coco, which, in case y'all want an update, can still make me shed a tear or at least water up my eyes, even after all this time. Well, that's a wrap on my Scream 6 podcast episode. I feel like we had a lot to talk about. I feel like I could have talked about so much more. Oh, man. Really enjoyed the franchise. Really do. Absolutely going to buy it when it comes out on Blu-ray. I wish they'd put like a Blu-ray series of some kind of the 3 Scream seasons. I only have the first one out as far as I know. I check every so often, of course. But I guess the biggest question now is, when will Scream 7 come out? Not if, but when. And also, when is someone going to get me a Ghostface Funko Pop? That's the other question. No pressure, but if you want to, definitely let me know that on social media. But I do hope to make a full episode of the entire franchise before the 7th one comes out, and the TV stuff as well. Hopefully the 7th one comes back with, like I said, those 3 legacy characters that one is presumed dead, but there's always a maybe, and, you know, the power couple of Sidney and Detective Kincaid. Someone, and his would be fascinating just because we haven't seen him in so long. At least we've seen and heard of, Sidney Campbell, but I'm just curious. And we all hope that Neve Campbell will come back. But what did you think of this latest foray into the, I'd say, Woodsboro and Ghostface saga, but really it's just the Ghostface stuff because it took a trip to NYC and it panned out for the best. Let me know if you agree with my rave reviews or what you think you want to see in a probable eventual sequel of the Scream franchise at Knickknack Movies or Knickknack_IC on Twitter, Instagram, Twitter, and of course, as a film geek I am, this movie spoke to me, to my soul, as a weird film kid, Letterboxd. Well, that's all from me. So, cheers, and as always, until next time, cinephiles. Are you not entertained? I think this is going to be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. I don't like goodbyes. Let's just call this see you later, alligator.